So, Chapter 12 of Two Blue Vortex has officially been out for a little while now, which means I've had some time to think. And I think we all know me having some time to think about a Boruto chapter is usually a dangerous thing. And Chapter 12 of Boruto, Two Blue Vortex, has given me more to think about than basically any other chapter of TBV. Because this chapter had everything. It had a great battle between Boruto and Tidari. It gave us exposition on the Rasengan Uzuhiko. It possibly revealed who Boruto's teachers were. And it also revealed a very minor detail that may have major consequences down the line. See, because while a multitude of things were revealed in Chapter 12 of Two Blue Vortex, genuinely, I believe the most important thing that was revealed was the fact that somehow, some way, Hidari was healed by a tree of sorts. And while the simple and easy explanation for that would be, oh, well, Hidari's a living divine tree, so maybe trees just heal him. As somebody who has a PhD in Kishimotoology, Hidari popping into a claw mark and going back to what is presumably the Shinju hideout to have what would be a fatal wound for basically everybody else healed by the roots of a tree seems to imply that somewhere, somehow, there is a divine tree. And not only is there a divine tree, but there's a divine tree with enough energy left in it to act as a medical ninjutsu specialist for the Shinju. But I don't know if you guys know this, but divine trees are kind of rare. In fact, divine trees are exceedingly rare on account of the fact that in order to create a divine tree, you not only need a 10-tails, but also an Otsutsuki to feed to that 10-tails. And usually, and by usually I mean 100% of the time after you accomplish that, you pluck the chakra fruit that grows from that divine tree, and that divine tree dies. Now, we know this because we've seen Momoshiki's planet, and Momoshiki's planet is littered with divine trees that are all dead on account of the fact that they've had their chakra fruit plucked, and thus Hidari being able to pop back to a divine tree that seems to have enough energy to heal him and presumably everybody else amongst the Shinju seems to imply that somewhere, somehow, a divine tree is not only grown, but also hasn't had its chakra fruit plucked. Or maybe there's a divine tree out there that simply never produced a chakra fruit, or dead divine trees are still imbued with enough energy to heal other divine trees. And that's the beauty of the situation. Genuinely, we haven't been given a question mark this large, maybe in Naruto ever, except for like immediately after Kaguya's reveal. That was probably the biggest question mark. We're like, oh my god, there's aliens? Because whether or not there might be a tree somewhere may not seem like a massively important deal. In the context of Naruto, the existence of a separate and unknown divine tree with enough energy to heal the likes of Hidari could be the key to unlocking what is 2,000 years of mystery. Because one of the biggest question marks between Boruto and Naruto are the presumed retcons between Kaguya's story of how ninjadom was created and the story we're told in Boruto of how Kaguya came to Earth. And thus, while this divine tree may seem like an incredibly minor detail, it could actually reveal to us the truth behind the history of the Naruto universe and how it might all tie back into Shibai, which is an idea I've been playing with for years. So, to say the least, we got a lot to talk about today. But before we dive headlong into the possible explanation of how Hidari was able to heal himself with the roots of a tree, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. But before we get into all that, today we're gonna talk about our favorite recurring sponsor to the page, Factor. Factor is an absolute must for you this summer, as Factor allows you to fuel up fast on dietitian-approved, absolutely delicious meals that only take 2 minutes to get ready. And in these warm, sunny months, as some of us emerge from our winter caves, the idea of being stuck in grocery stores or the kitchen cooking up lunch or dinner is just not the play. But Factor offers so much more than just these delicious dietitian-approved and never frozen meals, as they also offer snacks, smoothies, and so much more. They provide you with a wide variety of easy options for your day, whether that be breakfast, midday bites, or anything else. And let me just tell you, Factor plays a massive role in my life. As somebody who runs 3 YouTube channels and is in the process of making a 4th, I don't have hours to spend thinking about what I'm gonna eat and preparing it. But at the same time, fitness and health is massively important to me, which is why Factor's fresh, never frozen, dietitian approved, and delicious meals are huge for me. But there's a big difference between telling and showing. So let's head down to the kitchen and show you just how delicious these meals are. Today we're making some creamy Parmesan chicken.
And making a Factor meal is as easy as taking that slide off, poking a couple of holes in our foil here, and throwing this meal in the microwave for a grand total of 2 minutes.
And now for the all-important taste test.
Somehow that chicken is still incredibly juicy, it's well seasoned, It's perfect.
Head to factor75.com or click the link below and use code NCHammer2350 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders. That's code NCHammer2350 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month of orders. It's time to take back your time. And if you love the idea of me giving you crackpot theories about your other favorite anime and manga, go ahead and follow my other channel, The Weeb Commander, where instead of talking about Naruto and Boruto, I talk all other anime and manga. Or if you want to see me try to bring real-life challenges to the anime world, go ahead and follow my brand new project that I just created with Danny Mata, Stephen He, and Chris Barnett, Anime IRL. Or if you just want to hear me talk about anime, go ahead and follow my anime podcast, Otaku's Anonymous, where me and Danny Mata break down everything that happened in anime and manga this week. It's available on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So, there's a sentient divine tree, and that's concerning. Kind of, maybe. See, unfortunately, this is one of those situations that we know so incredibly little about that we don't really know whether or not it is actually concerning. Because basically, all that we do know concretely is that Boruto in his battle against Hidari landed a Rasengan on Hidari's shoulder. And this blow devastated Hidari, hitting him so hard that his right arm came off. And this attack was so devastating that Hidari had to retreat into his claw marks to be healed. And that's where things begin to get interesting. See, we've known ever since a couple of chapters ago that all of the Shinjus are able to use the power of the claw marks. Basically, ever since the Shinju were introduced and Ishiki leaned back into the giant black box that sits in the center of the Shinju hideout and popped his head out of a claw grime, making its way to Konoha, we've known that for some reason or another, the Shinju are able to use the claw marks. But this is rather interesting because so far as we understood, prior to the Shinju being shown to be able to use these claw marks, we believe this was an ability specific to that of Code. So ironically, when trying to answer the question of how did that tree heal Hidari, we have to answer the question of how are the Shinju able to use the claw marks? Because the giant black box that sits in the middle of a Shinju hideout might be the reason that the Shinju are healed by the tree above the black box. See, when the Shinju hideout was first introduced, I figured, like everybody else, that the giant black box in the middle of their hideout was just one of the black boxes that Ishiki was able to summon to drop and expand on people. Because how many giant black boxes are we really going to see in Boruto? However, upon further inspection and going back to the Ishiki versus Naruto and Sasuke fight, the black boxes that Ishiki pulls out of the Daikoku Ten and expands to drop on the likes of Naruto and Sasuke look a lot different than the black box we see in the center of the Shinju hideout. To be specific about that, the boxes that Ishiki pulls out of the Daikoku Ten have 3 squares on the side, while the black box in the center of the Shinju hideout only has 1. And while this is a minor detail that you probably wouldn't pick up on unless you were actively trying to make a video about it, it seems fairly obvious, at least to me, that the box that the Shinju are using is different than the box Ishiki was using. And this is obviously corroborated by the fact that these boxes work drastically different from each other. See, the giant black boxes that Ishiki used in combat were just that. Giant black boxes. Their entire purpose was to smash. However, rather interestingly, the Shinju black box seems to allow for travel through the claw marks. As like I already said, the reason that we were able to deduce that the Shinju were able to use the claw marks as an offensive ability is because Jura stuck his head into the black box to stick his head out of a claw mark on a claw grime. So something about this box allows for space-time ninjutsu. But does that mean that this box was created by the Shinju? Well, I tend to believe not. See, because here's the thing. Technically, while the Shinju were created from the claw grimes that were augmented by Code, that doesn't necessarily lend to the idea that Code is the reason that the Shinju can use the claw marks. Rather, the more apt conclusion to come to here would be that Code's ability to use the claw marks is not his own, which would make sense when you consider Code's origins, him being a cyborg augmented by Amado. And it makes even more sense when you consider the fact that the reason that Amado was able to make such powerful cyborgs is because he was able to get his hands on Shibai's body. But more about that in a second. See, the reason that I believe that the claw mark ability isn't specific to Code is because in this most recent chapter, chapter 12, we saw that the claw mark ability of Hidari was tied to his Rinnegan, which is fundamentally different from how Code uses it. So why would Code and Hidari be able to use the same technique in vastly different ways? Well, really, the only answer to that is that claw marks are an additional ability granted to somebody through some other means. And thus, because this ability is granted to somebody, it would manifest in different people differently. And thus, since this box appears to be the center of claw mark related abilities, it's a possibility that this box sitting in the center of the Shinju hideout is how Amado was able to give the claw marks to Code in the first place. Because after all, we've seen what Code looked like as a child, and he didn't have the claw marks all over his body. And thus, to assume that these claw marks were added onto his body by Amado later down the line isn't that crazy of a stretch. But that raises the question of, okay, then what's the black box? And for that, we might actually have an answer. I mean, it's odd that the only 2 two times we've seen a black box like this, they've been tied to the Otsutsuki. And considering the fact that the Otsutsuki are known for their space-time ninjutsu, assuming that this black box ties its origins to the Otsutsuki isn't crazy. But who? Which Otsutsuki? Pretty much all of them are accounted for, and none of them outside of Ishiki were throwing around black boxes, and Ishiki is gone. Well, there is one Otsutsuki who's not accounted for, and we know this Otsutsuki's body was used to give Shinjutsu to the cyborgs. And that Otsutsuki was none other than Shibai, whose body was used to give Ada and Daemon their respective Shinjutsu, Omnipotence and Reflect. And thus possibility that Code's claw marks are also tied to Shibai isn't that crazy. Now, obviously, there is, like we already stated, the possibility that the reason that the Shinju have the claw mark ability is because they were technically created by Code, but I think the black box placed in the middle of the Shinju hideout is there for a reason, and that reason could possibly be the true reason the Shinju are even introduced in the first place. See, because I think we can all accept the fact that the Shinju, while cool bad guys, are not the final bad guys of Boruto. I believe the Shinju fall into a more Akatsuki-esque role. They're there to make sure that we set up for the final villains, and thus one of the most prevalent answers on how Hidari is possibly able to be healed by this divine tree lies in that very black box. See, because if we assume that black box actually contains Shibai's physical body, then it would begin to make sense why that area is so supernaturally charged with energy. And that black box being Shibai's body makes a fair amount of sense. See, here's the thing. Obviously, if everyone was just passing around Shibai's physical body, that'd be kind of metal. Sure, that kind of thing happens in Naruto all the time. We hear stories about how Orochimaru and Kabuto went grave digging to get DNA samples from dead and gone ninjas like Hashirama and Tobirama, and thus the possibility that Amado was truly just taking slices off Shibai's body to give the Daemon, Ada, and possibly Code isn't all that crazy. The concept of bodies existing as vessels of energy also is not a new concept in the Naruto universe, especially when it comes to Otsutsukis, as Hamura's body in the last was basically implied to now exist as the supermassive Tenseigan energy cell. On top of this, Shibai, as the most powerful Otsutsuki of all time, was probably incredibly proud. And Shibai, who was definitely aware of the ability to karmically swap bodies, was also probably aware of the fact that if he left a body just behind, that another Otsutsuki would possibly be able to use and abuse his body for power. Power he worked for thousands of years to get. And thus an idea that we've been playing with on this channel for a long time is that Shibai hid his own body. And in what better place to do it than possibly a pocket dimensional box placed under a divine tree? See, think about it. If the Shinju are filling our Akatsuki role, where's their ghetto statue? What's the end game of the Shinju? I mean, obviously, they want to kill Boruto and consume Sarada and Konohamaru and Ada. But truly, what's their end goal? None of that is gonna happen. Himawari's not gonna get eaten by Jura. Sarada's not gonna get eaten by Hidari. There has to be a thing that the Shinju's presence in the story is pushing us towards. And what if that thing revolves around the black box? On top of this, Shibai's body existing under a divine tree makes a fair amount of sense. See, Shibai, as we all know, abandoned his physical body to ascend to a dimension of his own. But we don't know the way in which this power came to him. See, what we do know is that Shibai ate enough chakra fruit that eventually he reached a level of power where he could abandon his physical form. Something that every Otsutsuki wants to be able to do one day. But if we assume that Shibai had to achieve this level of power by eating chakra fruits, that means that the achievement of this level of power would most likely only happen after the consumption of one final chakra fruit, which means more likely than not that Shibai, after consuming his final chakra fruit, ascended to a different dimension and left his body behind somewhere. And that somewhere could be under the divine tree whose chakra fruit allowed him to ascend. Which would mean this black box, which now exists under a divine tree, would match all of the geographical prerequisites that we're looking for in terms of Shibai's resting place. But then okay, Nick, if Shibai consumed the chakra fruit of the divine tree, why is the divine tree still alive? Why does it have energy? Well, why were Ada and Daemon able to get Shinjutsu from Shibai's body? Why is the chakra of the dead and gone and the earth sucked into a chakra fruit? Why do we talk about Kaguya's chakra fruit being possibly the most powerful of all time? Because Shibai's corpse was on Earth. Why did the first god tree that we ever saw, the one that Kaguya said that she came down to Earth to follow, only absorb the nature, energy, and chakra of those who are too stupid to get close to it? And more importantly, why did that chakra tree exist? See, because while we can all sit here and say that what was told to us by Kaguya has now been retconned by Boruto, that's never been confirmed in any official sense whatsoever. Yes, the stories do disagree with each other, but Kishimoto has never come out and said, oh yeah, what Kaguya said doesn't count anymore. And thus people like me have been trying to find a way to connect these two plot points to each other without saying one's false and one is correct. And thus, what if what Kaguya said was true? What if Kaguya and Ishiki did come to Earth because they were pursuing a divine tree? What if upon realizing that the divine tree was already bearing another fruit that Kaguya decided to betray Ishiki? Because after all, like we know, the divine tree that Kaguya said she descended down to Earth to retrieve already had a chakra fruit on it. And while many, including myself, hypothesize that in actuality Kaguya and Ishiki came to Earth in order to find Shibai's body, and therefore they wanted to make a tree out of Earth because they knew the energy and power of Shibai would be funneled into that tree as his dead body was on that planet. And after they descended down to Earth, Kaguya jumps Ishiki and feeds his legs to the 10 tails they brought with them that becomes the god tree that she eats the chakra fruit of in order to enact her first infinite Tsukiyomi. But what if in actuality, the story looks a bit differently? See, while I genuinely cannot doubt the idea that Kaguya and Ishiki came to Earth together and Kaguya jumped Ishiki, the existence of a tree that's able to heal other divine trees centered around a mysterious black box seems to be something that could only well and truly fall in line with what Kaguya told us in the war arc. See, the tree that Kaguya stumbled upon created a chakra fruit so powerful that she was able to awaken a Rinne Sharingan, something that oddly specifically enough has only ever been tied to her or the 10 tails, while every other person who's ever consumed a chakra fruit, like Ishiki or Momoshiki, has never awoken a Rinne Sharingan. And based off everything we've seen up until this point, a Rinne Sharingan outside of a Jogan is pretty much the most powerful dojutsu you can unlock. So why did Momoshiki, who's consumed dozens of planets, and Ishiki, who's consumed hundreds, never awaken a Rinne Sharingan? Well, the obvious answer is it has something to do with the fruit that Kaguya ate, a chakra fruit that was seemingly left behind. But what if in actuality this chakra fruit wasn't left behind? Because everything we know about the Otsutsuki kind of makes the idea of a chakra fruit being left behind seem insane. What if in actuality this chakra fruit just took thousands of years to be created? See, while generally the act of a 10 tails consuming an Otsutsuki seems to be the way that we see a chakra fruit created, really the important takeaway here is that a divine tree is created, the roots dig into the earth and absorb enough energy to create a chakra fruit of differing quality. Now supposedly the reason a divine tree dies is the reason that any tree dies: lack of nutrients. And since the idea of a divine tree is to deplete an entire planet of all of its nutrients, it would make sense that after one divine tree being planted on a planet, the tree would die. However, in the case of Shibai's hypothetical body existing under this hypothetical divine tree, the planet wouldn't be tapped out of all resources. See, while yes, the earth would be made barren by the first chakra fruit that was created and consumed by Shibai, after Shibai laid his body to rest in the earth, the massive amount of energy that Shibai's body contains would not only feed the divine tree, but also possibly reinvigorate the planet. And thus, slowly but surely, this divine tree that didn't die could hypothetically produce another chakra fruit, a chakra fruit that Kaguya would go on to consume. And what's wild is that if we move forward with this idea, it perfectly connects the two stories of Kaguya's history we have. See, if we assume that Kaguya and Ishiki were well and truly looking for Shibai's body when they stumbled upon a divine tree with a fruit already bore, for the first time in Kaguya's life, she would see a chakra fruit, because obviously the creation of a chakra fruit up until that point in Kaguya's life would require her sacrifice to a 10 tails. And thus, once Kaguya and Ishiki both saw this chakra fruit that could possibly be tied to the all-encompassing power of Shibai, she attacked Ishiki, making sure that she would be the one to be able to consume this wildly powerful fruit. Which is why when she goes on to consume this fruit, she becomes one of the most powerful Otsutsuki we've ever seen, even after only accomplishing something that almost every single higher-ranking Otsutsuki has accomplished: the consumption of one chakra fruit. And what's even crazier than that is if we move forward with this line of thinking, it also explains why there's two 10 tails, and why one of them is so much younger than the other. Because everything we know about Kaguya's backstory from Hagoromo told us that Kaguya was able to turn into the 10 tails that was later split into the 9-tailed beast after consuming the divine tree that she took the chakra fruit from. Now, if we assume that a 10 tails can turn into a divine tree, and that a divine tree can turn into a 10 tails, like was proven in Shippuden, this would mean that every single divine tree, assuming it stays alive, is basically just a 10 tails. And that's corroborated by the existence of the Shinju, who are both referred to as the 10 tails and the divine tree. And thus, since this divine tree stayed alive for possibly thousands of years after Shibai depleted the planet of all of its chakra, that would explain why this Ten Tails is so much more massive than the juvenile Ten Tails that exists at the Kara hideout, and is now possibly Jura, because the juvenile Ten Tails would be the Ten Tails that Kage and Ishiki brought to Earth hoping to turn into a divine tree to sap into the power of Ishiki 1,000 years ago, but upon realizing that there was already a divine tree there, they wouldn't need to use that Ten Tails, and so they would put that Ten Tails in captivity. This would also explain why Ishiki is in control of that Ten Tails, because it was the Ten Tails that responded to him, the Ten Tails he brought to Earth. But then Nick, why is that Ten Tails still a juvenile Ten Tails? Well, Otsutskis live forever. The idea that a juvenile Ten Tails is 1,000 years old isn't that crazy. Yeah, 1,000 years seems like a long time to you, but not to somebody who's immortal, who's possibly millions of years old. And when we think about how all-encompassing the power of the Ten Tails are, like the fact that they're so powerful they're able to terraform entire planets, and all of that comes from the fact that they are just pure nature energy, and the collection of nature energy takes a fair amount of time, them having to be several thousand years old in order to achieve this level of power makes sense, especially when you use the nine-tailed beast as an example, considering the fact that all of them are at least 1,000 years old. And what's even crazier than all of this is that technically, if we move forward with this line of thinking, it perfectly explains Rasengan Uzuhiko. Nick, what could you possibly mean by that? Well, chapter 12 of Boruto revealed to us that the way that Rasengan Uzuhiko works is by Boruto tapping into the power of the earth. And while technically Rasengan Uzuhiko more focuses on Boruto channeling the power of the rotational ability of the earth and its centripetal force, what it does require for Boruto to do is to have 2 feet on the ground in order to channel that energy. However, ironically, the reveal of a massive Rasengan Uzuhiko this chapter only solidified claims that whatever jutsu Shibai was using in the one time we've seen him might have been something Rasengan Uzuhiko oriented, as the massive swirls that Boruto shoots up into the air are eerily reminiscent of the swirls that Shibai is surrounded with. And thus, if in much a similar way as to how Father was the core of all energy in the FMAB universe, well, I guess at least in Austeria? I forget the name of the country. Amestris. Yeah, kind of close. But if Boruto was, much like how all alchemy is derived power from Father, deriving power from Shibai's corpse, which reinvigorated the earth after he stole it all in the form of a chakra fruit, then that would explain why Boruto has to keep his feet on the ground, and why the explanation of earth energy has been so vague. Because while technically this earth energy does act a bit like sage energy, the key takeaway from all of this is that Boruto needs to keep his feet on the ground to channel a technique that's eerily similar to that of Shibai's. And thus it feels as though that the establishment of 2 feet on the ground is less a connection between Boruto and the earth and more a connection between Boruto and Shibai. However, what this chapter has made me realize is that those two things may not be as separate as we originally anticipated, as the real reason that humans are so incredibly powerful could be strictly the fact that they were all given chakra from Shibai's original source. That the reason that characters like Naruto and Boruto are able to raise their fist against Ten Tails, entities that should be unparalleled in power amongst all universes, is because a god of the Otsutsuki's body lays on their planet, and another Otsutsuki, in a moment of infinite hubris, decided to betray her own clan to achieve that power, and she would later go on to spread that power amongst all humanity. And thus the real reason that Boruto has become so powerful over the course of the time skip, and the reason that a human on Earth developed the Jogan, was because Boruto was born to tap into the power of Shibai. That is to say, he was born to tap into the power of the very planet. And if you don't like that for an explanation, then you just don't like having fun.
Because yes, technically the box in the center of the room acts as a giant space-time ninjutsu, and since they can all access claw marks that allow for interdimensional travel, this divine tree could just exist in a different dimension.
And yeah, that's an absolute possibility. This divine tree could be in a separate dimension, and the Shinju could be popping between dimensions to get to Earth through the claw marks. But that is boring. Unless, of course, the divine tree is in the Kara dimension, and somehow the Kara dimension is tied into the Earth's dimension. But personally, I think it's Shibai. But I'm curious to hear from you guys. How do you believe Hidari was able to tap into the power of the great tree to heal him? Tell me in the comments below. And while you guys are down there, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. I feel good about this one. I feel good about all my theories, but I feel especially good about this one.